it amazes me how many people are not familiar with real estate. And I don't mean the general public. The general public, I understand that. It's a transaction that the average person doesn't do every day. And there are a variety of details and nuances in that process. And my channel is an attempt to unpack that for individuals, but more specifically for people that want to buy real estate for investment purposes. But back to my point before, and that is that professionals, and by professionals I mean realtors, lack a lot of knowledge about real estate transactions themselves. In fact, 80% of realtors last year did not even do a transaction. And so there's a big gap in working knowledge of how things work. For example, in wholesale, many realtors have a large misconception about what wholesalers are doing in real estate. Now, I'm not a wholesaler per se, and that is all that I do. I have sold a couple contracts as an aside, as an option B. But the point is that realtors have an idea of wholesalers that I think is totally off. And here's what I mean. Many realtors, and I've heard them say this, basically believe that wholesalers are trying to lowball the offer so that they can then take that offer and resell it to another sector in the public for the same asking price that the realtor was seeking. That's absolutely bogus. Now, are there people that will buy low and sell high? Sure, there's a handful of those, but that tells me that realtors do not understand wholesaling. That's not what's going on with the wholesaler. And so realtors kind of get their feathers ruffled. And I think the primary reason that happens is because in their minds, based on this misbelief, which I'm going to unravel for you, but in their minds, they're going to look bad. They are going to somehow suggest or be okay with or allow a transaction to take place with their seller to sell this property for less than it really was worth. And then find out that this wholesaler is going to, in their minds, sell it at a higher value for $250,000 instead of $200,000. That's the example we were talking about before, right? So to give context, they're not trying to buy it for $200,000 and then resell it for $250,000, and you had it listed for $250,000. That's not what they're doing. But many realtors think that they're buying low, selling high. And while there are a few people out there that may do that, that's not the bulk of where wholesaling is taking place. And realtors, I think, are overly sensitive to that because they're thinking, hey, am I going to suggest to my seller to take less for property that's really worth more? And then the second part of that is, hey, am I not doing my job and somebody else could sell it? So I get it. But their motive is self-centered. It's centered in how it makes them look instead of understanding the transaction. And so what's really happening with wholesalers is they are spending the time researching and negotiating a project or a investment property, if you will, to come up with a solution that will give a return on investment to an investor. So they're doing all the legwork. They're going to call on all the properties. They're going to negotiate. They're going to find out what it's worth. They're going to put together the numbers on their side, present an offer. And if they get that under contract, then they are going to an investor and saying, hey, I have found this deal, and here's the rate of return that you're going to get on this investment. Are you of interest to that? And they say, yes, I like that. And they say, okay, will you pay me a fee for my services of having done that? Sure, I'll pay you. And they pay them a fee for that service to take, and then the investor then takes over that contract. That's what wholesaling is. It's not, you're listing the house for $250,000, they're going to offer you $200,000, and then they're going to turn around and sell for $250,000. And I think realtors have this false idea that wholesalers are going to make $50,000 on what is a flip on paper. Now, I'm not saying there aren't individuals that don't do that, but that's not what the majority of wholesalers are looking to do. Real estate agents are misinformed because of their own selfish bias. And it's unfortunate. Because if they actually knew what wholesalers were doing, they would extend themselves out and go, how can I help you in the process? How can I, hey, you've got somebody that's interested? Awesome. Well, have them call me if they have any questions, and you'd help them sell. So I think the other misconception is that realtors believe that wholesalers are making these big chunks of money. On my example, it's not, I'm going to buy it for $200,000, flip it for $250,000, and now I pocket $50,000. We're talking wholesalers are making $3,000 to $7,000 for that contract. Does that make sense? Now on larger contracts, yeah, they're going to make 10, 15, 20,000. But we're talking about wholesalers making between $5,000 and $20,000 on selling a contract for services that they did all the research. They negotiated an investment that has a good rate of return. And I think people fail to see that, look, wholesalers are active investors, meaning researching, contacting the public. And there are another group of investors that are the passive investors. They are not looking to do the research and have the conversations and break it down. They like real estate. They want to be in real estate. They understand the basics enough that they can go, hey, I put this much down. It's a rental. I get a return on my money. Passive investor. And so there is a service. This is the way that realtors can sell their properties to passive investors, by having an intermediary that can break that down and package it in such a way that makes sense. At the end of the day, if you don't like your realtors, then learn real estate. Learn how to package that deal so that it's investment if you want to bypass what you think is the middleman. But that middleman right now is a service to realtors, and they're labeling it with the wrong perception. And I've heard realtors label wholesalers and all kinds of things. By the way, one of the biggest reasons that I hear realtors don't like wholesalers is they describe wholesalers as putting, no money down or low earnest money and tying the property up for months on end. Now, I fail to understand how that ever occurs if you're actually a good real estate agent. Because while you give that example to sell your story, and it's a sob story, why would you take $100 earnest money on a $300,000 or $400,000 property? That I don't get. So they give examples that I don't think they'd actually enter into. And if they do, then they shouldn't really be in real estate to begin with. So that makes no sense to me. And then they do like to say, and they tie up properties for 1, 2, 3, 4 months. That I do not understand either. The contract has a close of escrow, and the contract has an inspection period. And the inspection period at the end, the money goes hard, meaning that it's not refundable. And at that point in time, if it's still in contract, if a realtor doesn't like that, they could build verbiage into the contract indicating that at this particular point in time in the date, if the wholesaler, whether they're a wholesaler for really or it's someone else is buying, has not executed the contract by this date, this contract becomes void. Just do that. I mean, how much time did you lose? If it's under contract, how many real estate agents do you know that take it off the market? Right? I mean, don't they usually leave it on the market? It says pending. It says under contract. It says taking backup offers. So realtors are presenting a story to present a sob story, but it's not all the truth. They leave it on the market. They're okay taking backup offers. So realtors, I don't think are helping themselves by, number one, not understanding the wholesale industry. And they're certainly describing it in a way that it doesn't exist. So that's the basic context of just one aspect. That's just one aspect of real estate. And how realtors who are the professionals should know more than that. If they don't, they should ask around, investigate. So the other part of that is that I don't understand why they say it's tied up, because it's tied up for the period of time that there's an inspection period. And if we're talking about single family homes, we're talking about 10 to 15 days, maybe 20 days would be a long inspection period of time that is technically tied up. But if realtors wrote the right verbiage in there and they want to just kill the contract at the end of the inspection period, say, hey, you know what, Mr. Seller, we're going to give you a 10-day window that this person, if they can execute on the price you said you're okay with, we get a sold house. But they don't do that. So, and it's unfortunate. That's just one niche, one aspect of real estate that there's so many nuances, and I run into that regularly. And I guess the last point I'll make on that is that I've seen many realtors attempt to label what they think might be a wholesaler. For example, one of those is, hey, if somebody's making an offer with an LLC, then that's a wholesaler. I don't know how you arrive at that conclusion. I know many investors, full-time investors, buying properties for themselves. And if you investigate, spend a little bit of time with attorneys, you find out that that's an intelligent thing to do to make an offer with an LLC. That's not bad. And so, especially, if they're using that LLC to buy the property, then that makes sense. So realtors need to understand real estate and what people are doing with real estate, how they're growing their estates, and what the recommendation of advisor circles are as to how to do that. And yet there are realtors who will flat out label that kind of an offer or that kind of signature line as a wholesaler and change their entire approach. And they're shooting, first, they're not shooting themselves in their foot. They're shooting their sellers in the foot. And then they're shooting themselves in the foot as well, because they're not representing the fiduciary duty to make the transaction come to close. And by saying that, I'm not saying they have to accept low offers. I'm saying they missed the point. And by the way, many times wholesalers will offer close to the listing price, but they've packaged in terms or in such a way that investors will understand that obviously real estate agents have not understood. And again, I guess that makes sense because 80% of real estate agents in the last year didn't do transactions, while 65% of the transactions are commercial and investment related, and less than 1% of all transactions as measuring in dollars are spent in residential real estate, owner occupied second homes. The majority of all money, and by majority I mean almost 99.8% of all dollars flow through commercial, multifamily, and investment related properties. And so it's a shame we would think that investors would, or not rather investors, but rather that realtors would learn some more about that. And I encourage them to do that. I was a realtor, so I feel like I can speak a little more openly about what that community looks like, and it is a bubble. But anyway, so the entire real estate market as a whole has a variety of nuances in it. And that's just one nuance of wholesaling. And there are several sides to that. How the seller is going to benefit or not, and what unfortunately the realtor's perception is of these transactions does not, in my opinion, help the seller ultimately. They're not fulfilling their fiduciary duty. I mean, at the end of the day, the realtor thinks that, hey, this is a wholesale deal. I've heard them flat out say, I'm going to demand non-refundable earnest money. I'm going to require more earnest money. Well, that's technically a discriminatory way of negotiating. And as a licensed individual, you should be protecting against that kind of activity happening. And yet that's implying that. So that's my take.